The data we just looked at already tells us a lot about where people captured and sold on the African coast ended up in the Americas. It means that this new data, that is to say the new data from the Voyage's website, lets us know a lot more than we ever expected to about the ethnic origin of people of African descent in particular parts of the diaspora. If we look at where people enslaved in the Americas came from, we can see the dominance of West Central Africa, or modern-day Angola, over time. It's especially true in the first 150 years of the trade, when 9 out of every 10 slaves crossing the Atlantic came from that region. But it's true for most of the slave trade, except for a period in the late 17th and early 18th century, when the Bight of Benin, or as it was then called, the Slave Coast, was the largest region of departure. You will also note that Senegambia, Sierra Leone, and the Windward Coast were not really big players in the trade, though they're best positioned geographically from a European point of view. The voyage from Senegambia to the Caribbean was about half as long as from the journey further south, and the fact that they were not more involved in the trade clearly points to the agency of African merchants and leaders in determining the shape of the transatlantic slave trade. And because ship captains returned repeatedly to the same place to do business with the same merchants, there are predictable patterns to the trade. And overall, the British predominated in the Bight of Biafra and the Portuguese in West Central Africa. There's one other clear pattern I want to talk about, and that has to do with the gender and age of the people who were enslaved. And there's a clear gender pattern among those who were made saltwater slaves, that is to say, sold into the Atlantic trade. The consequences of this gender difference are huge. The enslaved population is about 2/3 male, most adults and the rest boys under 15 years of age. That balance changed slightly over time, and it could vary significantly by region of departure. But overall, the number of women and girls in the transatlantic slave trade averaged 1/3. It's true that women were cheaper to purchase, and it's also true that American planters said that they wanted males, and that European captains of slaving voyages were instructed to load cargoes of males. But the main reason for the gender ratios is not what planters wanted, but in fact what African traders were willing to do. The decision laid with the suppliers, and their decision about who to retain for the domestic slavery, who to retain for domestic slavery or the trans-Saharan slave trade, and who to sell into the transatlantic part of the trade. We're going to return to this theme repeatedly in the course because the reproductive consequences of this are huge. I should say the reproductive and demographic consequences. With 33 women for every man in the trade, it's not hard to imagine why that is. You can see it in the negative population growth in all the plantation societies in the Americas in the 17th and the 18th century, with one exception, British North America, which shaped Southern society in unique ways.